The first light of dawn crept over the distant hills, casting long golden streaks across the dew-soaked grass of the Patriot encampment. Smoke from last night's campfires still curled lazily upward, mingling with the sharp, earthy scent of damp soil and wood ash. Mary Thompson, a camp follower, stirred from her rough wool blanket, brushing strands of hair from her tired face. She was not a soldier, but her work was as vital as any musket or bayonet in the fight for independence. Women like Mary cooked, washed, sewed, and nursed the sick, often following their husbands, brothers, or sons into the heart of war. As she sat up, she could hear the muffled sounds of soldiers stirring in their tents, boots thumping, low murmurs, and the faint clatter of tin cups. The camp was waking slowly, but Mary's day had already begun. She rose, wrapping a faded shawl around her shoulders to guard against the chill, and began to gather the scattered tools of her trade, an iron pot blackened from constant use, a wooden spoon, and a small sack of meal that would soon become breakfast for hungry soldiers. She worked quickly, her breath misting in the cool air, because food meant morale, and morale meant survival. Many soldiers fought with empty stomachs, and Mary knew that a hot meal could lift spirits in ways gunpowder never could. As she stoked the embers of a campfire, sparks danced in the dim morning light. She added a few sticks of dry kindling, coaxing the flames higher, while her mind drifted briefly to home, an image of green fields, quiet mornings, and a bed that did not smell of smoke and sweat. But those comforts were far away, and for now, the war was her home. The sun crept higher, washing the camp in pale morning light as Mary stirred the bubbling pot. The thin mixture of cornmeal and water thickened slowly, its bland aroma drifting into the cool air. Food was scarce, and most mornings the soldiers were lucky to have even this simple mush. Mary worked quickly, moving between two fires, her hands steady despite the heat. A few other women, also camp followers, joined her. Together, they prepared enough food to feed dozens of weary men. The rations were meager, sometimes just hardtack biscuits, salt pork, or a watery stew made from whatever scraps could be found. "Smells better than yesterday," a voice said behind her. She turned to see Private Samuel Clark, his young face drawn with exhaustion but attempting a smile. His coat was frayed, and his boots were coated in dried mud, but his tone carried a quiet gratitude. "Don't expect miracles," Mary replied with a faint smile. "This isn't a tavern, you know." He chuckled softly and crouched near the fire, warming his hands. "It's better than nothing, and better than what the British get, I hope." Mary smiled at that. Every small comfort, every hot meal, felt like defiance against the enemy. She ladled portions into battered tin bowls, handing them out one by one as more soldiers lined up. Some men offered a quiet thank you, while others ate in silence, too tired or hungry to speak. As she served them, Mary felt a deep sense of purpose. She was not holding a musket, but in her own way, she was fighting. A full belly meant strength for another march, another battle, and that meant the cause of independence stayed alive for one more day. The camp slowly grew louder. The clanging of metal cups, the distant sound of soldiers drilling, and the occasional bark of orders cutting through the morning air. But around Mary's fire, there was a momentary calm, a reminder that even in war, small acts of care could keep hope alive. After breakfast, The camp shifted into its daily rhythm, drills in the distance, officers moving between tents, and messengers darting across the field with urgent notes. For Mary, the next task was as important as feeding the men, mending their clothes and bandaging their wounds. She spread a worn wool blanket on the ground, setting out her tools, a bone needle, coarse thread, and scraps of linen torn from old shirts. Around her, a few other camp followers did the same, forming a small circle of quiet industry amid the chaos of military life. Private Clark returned, holding up a torn sleeve with a sheepish grin. "Looks like I lost a fight with a musket strap." Mary took the jacket from him, running her fingers over the frayed edges. The fabric was thin, patched many times before. "This coat has seen better days," she said, threading her needle. "But it will last a little longer yet." She worked quickly, her stitches neat despite the rough thread. Around her, other soldiers waited patiently for repairs, ripped breeches, torn hats, and even worn-out socks. These clothes were more than just garments. They were protection against the biting cold nights and muddy marches. Not far away, a soldier limped toward her, his boot stained dark with dried blood. Mary set aside her needle, her heart sinking at the sight of him. She motioned for him to sit, fetching a small wooden box of makeshift medical supplies. Bandages boiled in vinegar, strips of clean linen, and a small jar of salve made from herbs were all she had. The soldier winced as she unwrapped the boot, revealing a swollen, blistered foot. "You should have come sooner," Mary said gently. "Didn't want to slow the march," he muttered. Mary cleaned the wound carefully, humming softly as she worked. Her hands were steady, practiced. She had tended to many such injuries, blisters, cuts, fevered brows, though she was not a trained nurse, camp followers. Learned quickly. Survival depended on it. When she finished, she tied the bandage snugly and gave him a reassuring nod. "Rest it as much as you can, and no marching for at least a day." The soldier smiled weakly. "You're a better doctor than half the surgeons we've got." Mary chuckled. But inside, she felt the weight of it all. Every life she could ease, every coat she could mend. It felt like stitching the very fabric of the army together, one careful thread at a time. By late morning, the camp began to hum with a different kind of energy. Soldiers who weren't drilling or standing guard wandered through the makeshift market area. A loose gathering of camp followers, peddlers, and even a few farmers brave enough to sell their goods near the army. Mary made her way there, carrying a small basket lined with scraps of cloth. She had saved bits of flour, a few extra stitches of thread, and a pair of worn socks she had mended. These simple items could be traded for things the army often lacked. The market was a lively, if modest, place. Rough wooden tables held jars of molasses, hand-carved pipes, and a few withered apples. Some women sold small pies or bread, while others offered laundry services. The air was thick with the scent of tobacco smoke and the murmur of bargaining voices. Mary stopped at a table where an older woman, Martha Green, was selling candles made from animal tallow. "Morning, Mary," Martha greeted her, wiping her hands on her apron. "Morning," Mary replied, holding up the socks. "Good stitches, strong wool. Trade you these for 2 candles." Martha examined them, nodding. "Deal. You always do neat work." She handed Mary 2 thick, slightly greasy candles, precious items for dark nights in camp. Further along, Mary approached a farmer with a cart of onions and dried herbs. She traded a bit of mended cloth for a small bundle of Thai, perfect for flavoring the bland stews she cooked. As she moved through the market, she exchanged greetings with other camp followers. Many of them, like her, had left homes and families behind to follow the army, finding ways to survive on the fringes of war. Some followed husbands or sons. Others sought a living in the only place left to them. By the time she returned to her fire, her basket held 2 candles, a handful of onions, and a small pouch of salt. Not much, but every little trade made life in the camp a little more bearable. She smiled faintly as she unpacked her goods. In the midst of war, where musket fire and hardship were constant, these quiet exchanges felt almost like normal life, reminders of the world they were all fighting to return to. As the sun climbed higher, warming the camp, Mary gathered a bundle of dirty linen shirts, breeches, and stockings. Washing clothes was another essential task of camp followers, and it was often back-breaking work. She slung the heavy bundle over her shoulder and made her way to the nearby river, where the steady sound of rushing water mingled with the distant crack of musket drills. The riverbank was already dotted with women kneeling in the mud, their skirts hitched up as they scrubbed soldiers' clothing against smooth stones. Wooden tubs filled with soapy water sat nearby, and wet garments hung on makeshift lines strung between tree branches. Mary knelt beside the water, rolling up her sleeves. She dipped a shirt into the cold current, wringing it out before rubbing it with a bar of rough lye soap. The smell of wet wool and soap filled the air, and her fingers soon grew red from the cold water and harsh soap. Beside her, a young camp follower named Eliza. Carter sighed dramatically. "These men think clean shirts grow on trees," she muttered. Mary smiled faintly. "Be glad we're near a river this week." "Some camps don't even have water close by," Eliza snorted. "And when winter comes, we'll be breaking ice just to wash a single shirt." The women laughed softly, their voices carrying over the water. Though the work was hard, these quiet conversations gave them a rare sense of companionship. They shared news from home, whispered about which officer was the most polite, and even joked about which soldiers were the worst at keeping their uniforms clean. Once Mary had scrubbed the last shirt, she carried it to a sunny patch of grass where other laundry was drying. The shirts fluttered gently in the breeze, a strange sight in the midst of a military camp. Clean clothes meant more than just comfort, it meant better health. Filthy uniforms spread lice and disease faster than bullets ever could, and Mary knew that keeping them clean saved lives. As she hung the final piece, she stood for a moment, gazing at the rows of white linen catching the sunlight. It was a simple, domestic scene in the middle of war. A reminder that even here, life still clung to its ordinary rhythms. As the sun dipped low, streaking the sky with soft orange and pink, the camp shifted from the bustle of drills and work to the slower rhythm of evening. Smoke rose in thin trails from dozens of small fires scattered across the encampment, carrying the smell of boiling stews, charred meat, and damp wood. Mary sat cross-legged near her own fire, stirring a pot of stew made from onions, salt pork, and the thyme she had traded for earlier. The aroma was simple but comforting, and a few soldiers lingered nearby, waiting for their portion. Private Clark appeared again, his coat freshly mended from earlier in the day. "That smells better than anything the quartermaster gives us," he said with a grin. Mary handed him a wooden bowl filled with the steaming stew. "Don't get used to it. Tomorrow, it might just be boiled turnips." He laughed and sat near the fire, warming his hands. More soldiers joined, forming a small circle. The conversations were low and tired, but now and then, laughter broke out as men traded stories. Some true, some wildly exaggerated, of their lives before the war. One man spoke about his farm in Pennsylvania, another about a sweetheart waiting back home. Mary listened quietly as she stirred the pot, their words painting pictures of a world beyond the camp. When the meal was finished, some soldiers pulled out fiddles and fifes, playing soft tunes that drifted into the evening air. The music mixed with the crackling of the fires, creating a rare moment of peace. Mary allowed herself a small smile, leaning back against a log. For just a little while, the war felt far away. Around the fire, these men weren't soldiers. They were sons, brothers, and husbands, laughing like they might have on any quiet evening at home. She watched the flames flicker, casting warm shadows across weary faces. For all its hardship, this life had its moments of beauty, moments where courage was found not in battle, but in simply sitting together, sharing food, and remembering why they fought. Night settled over the encampment, the stars faintly visible through thin streaks of cloud, while many soldiers drifted into exhausted sleep. Mary's work was far from done. She wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders and made her way toward the section of camp where the sick and wounded lay. The hospital was nothing more than a row of tents, their canvas flaps pulled back to allow air to circulate. Inside, the smell was heavy, a mix of sweat, damp straw, and the bitter tang of boiled herbs. Lanterns flickered, casting long, wavering shadows across weary faces. A young soldier groaned softly as Mary knelt beside him. His forehead glistened with sweat, and his breathing came in shallow gasps. Fever was spreading through the camp again, and medicine was scarce. She dipped a rag into a small bowl of cool water, gently wiping his brow. "Easy now," she whispered, her voice soft. "You'll feel better soon." The soldier opened his eyes for a moment, barely. Focusing on her. "Thank you, man," he murmured weakly before slipping back into a restless sleep. Mary moved to the next cot, where a man with a bandaged arm winced as he tried to sit up. She quickly pressed him back down. "Don't strain yourself. That wound needs rest." From her basket, she pulled out a jar of homemade salve, a mixture of animal fat and crushed herbs that camp women often used when nothing else was available. Carefully, she peeled back his bandage, cleaned the wound as best she could, and applied the salve. The man hissed in pain, but gave her a grateful nod. She worked quietly, moving from one patient to the next. Around her, other camp followers did the same, their faces weary but determined. Many were not trained nurses. They were wives, sisters, and mothers who had learned out of necessity. Mary paused for a moment, her hands resting in her lap. She thought of the lives she had seen slip away despite all efforts, but she pushed the thought aside. Tonight, her task was to comfort the living, even if it was only by wiping a brow or speaking a kind word. the distant sound of a fife played somewhere in the camp, a soft, mournful tune. Mary looked around at the rows of sleeping soldiers, some whispering in their fevered dreams. Here, in the quiet of the night, she felt the true weight of war, not in the noise of battle, but in the silent suffering of those left to endure it. The camp was quiet now. The fires burned low, and most soldiers slept soundly after the long day. Mary sat alone near her small tent, a lantern flickering softly beside her. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, feeling the cool night breeze, and let out a slow, tired breath. Before her, the camp stretched out in stillness. The silhouettes of tents glowed faintly under the moonlight, and the soft murmur of distant snores mixed with the occasional stamp of a horse's hoof. Somewhere far off, an owl hooted, breaking the otherwise peaceful silence. Mary took out a small scrap of paper and a stub of charcoal, luxuries she had traded for weeks ago. She rarely wrote letters, as there was no guarantee they would reach anyone. But tonight, she felt the need to put her thoughts into words. She wrote slowly, her hand careful and deliberate. "Dearest Mother, the camp is cold tonight, and the men are tired. But they keep their courage. I have seen their bravery in ways that will never be told in books. I have washed their clothes, fed their hungry bellies, and held their hands when fever burns them. It is not the kind of heroism people speak of, but it matters, I think, perhaps more than we know. I do not know when this war will end, but I hope that when it does, we will all remember these quiet moments, when strangers shared food, women sewed torn coats, and people cared for one another as if we were all family. Your loving daughter, Mary." She stared at the words for a long moment before folding the paper carefully and tucking it away in her small satchel. Maybe one day it would reach her family, or maybe it would remain with her, just another untold piece of history. Mary blew out the lantern, leaving only the soft glow of moonlight. She lay back on her thin blanket, gazing up at the stars. Tomorrow would bring the same routine. Cooking, mending, tending to the sick. But for now, in this quiet moment, she allowed herself a rare feeling of peace. A sleep crept over her. She thought of why she stayed, despite the hardships. It wasn't just for her husband or for duty. It was for the belief that someday, because of their sacrifices, a new world might rise, one where ordinary people like her would live in freedom. The lantern flickered one last time, then went dark, leaving Mary and the camp wrapped in the calm, quiet embrace of the night.